Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. Our website, our home base for all of our content is sportspectrum.com. That's a great place to go to check out everything we have going on here at Sports Spectrum. And then my email address, because you guys have a lot of good ideas for guests. You reach out a lot, and it's been very helpful. And a lot of the guests that we have on this podcast, a lot of the stories that we write about on sportspectrum.com, they come from you, the listener. So we appreciate your feedback, and we welcome it. So please send us an email. Jason@sportspectrum.com is my email address. Jason@sportspectrum.com. Today on the show, a show that's really, I think, an important one, and maybe my favorite one that we've done for a while here. Now that we're in 2021, Happy New Year. It's a brand new year, which is kind of crazy now when we think about it and all that we went through last year. But you might have heard us talk about Ronald Blue Trust. They are a sponsor and partner with us here at Sports Spectrum, and they, again, use biblical wisdom and technical expertise to help their clients make wise financial decisions to experience clarity and confidence and really leave a lasting legacy. That's what Ronald Blue Trust is about. And two of my favorite people that I know that I've been privileged to do ministry with, Don Christensen and Reed Crosson, both work for Ronald Blue Trust. And we were talking about some ideas on how to partner, and we thought, why don't we do a podcast and have it be really scenario-driven on what we should be thinking about, what we should be looking at regarding our finances and planning into 2021. Some of the common misnomers, maybe the common mistakes that some of us make with our finances. Don and Reed are tremendous. They are awesome people who come at this, again, because it's Ronald Blue Trust, from a biblical perspective. And that's the important thing here. We all got questions, and I had a lot of questions, and I was able to ask Don Christensen and Reed Crosson from Ronald Blue Trust for their answers. So I hope this encourages you. I think you'll really get a lot out of this conversation. I would grab a paper and pen, take notes, because I took a lot of notes here as I talked to Don and Reed about just some things to think about regarding financial planning in 2021. So take a listen to Don Christensen and Reed Crosson joining us here from Ronald Blue Trust on Sports Spectrum. Don, Reed, how are you guys doing? John, how are you?
I'm great.
Good.
Hey,
it's good to have you here. That's awesome. That's good to hear. Happy New Year to you, Reed. How are you, sir?
Good.
Doing well.
Good.
Yeah, it was a great holiday season, ready to get back at it in 2021.
That's it, man. We're here. It's a brand new year. I think a lot of us are waving goodbye with a big smile to what 2020 was. But I also thought 2020 taught us a lot of lessons. So let me start there. Maybe start with you, Don. When you think about top of mind, what was one of the big things that you kind of hit on and focused on from 2020, from the role that you have and the work that you do? What sticks out?
You know, I think that we quote a verse when we talk about how to invest money, and it's out of Ecclesiastes 11:1, where Solomon said, "Divide your portions into sevens, even to eights, because no one knows what evil may befall the earth." And in my lifetime, I cannot think where that verse was more applicable from the standpoint of nobody, I don't care what they say, ever saw this coming. You couldn't have seen this coming. This was, I said, an evil that no one can claim they knew about. And one of the other things is the shocking thing is that the market went down about 38% in 2 weeks in March. I had never seen that. I saw the market go down 20% in one day once in 1987, but never saw this. So I never saw, and that you would tell me in March that we would be above where we started in January 1. After all this, incredible. I mean, employment going to 20% and above. We're back to 6%. It just goes, it's mind-boggling how nobody knows what's going to happen next. And that's why principles work so well, because no one can anticipate what will happen.
Yeah. Reed, how about you when you think about 2020 and just looking back?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've only been in the industry for 8 or 9 years now. And so unlike Don, I was only one in 87, so I don't remember what that 20% drop was like. And honestly, since I've been in the industry, we haven't really had any downturns. And so for me, we have the privilege of getting to counsel couples, players, people across the whole country on biblical stewardship and financial principles. And this was the first time where I had to kind of look in the mirror and say, do these principles really work? And the biggest one that we keep falling back on is that God owns it all. It says he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. And it's easy to say that when the market's going gangbusters and things are going up. But when the market goes down 30% in 2 weeks, you kind of say, is this really true? Does God really own it all? And am I going to rest in that and find peace in that? Or am I going to get all anxious and start to feel like I need to do something different, maybe put it under my mattress, or which I always remind people that your house can be broken into and robbed. So it's not safe there either. But that, for me, that was the biggest takeaway from last year's, just resting in the fact that God is in control and he sits on his throne. He knows exactly what's going to happen. It wasn't a surprise to him, even though, like Don said, nobody could have foreseen this coming. God knew it was coming, and he's in control. So that was my takeaway.
If there's ever a year that we can look back and realize we truly are not in control, it was 2020. And that's from every perspective, whether it's financial, whether it's spiritual, whether it's, from the world perspective with sicknesses, we truly are not in control. So what I want to do here today, I think what would be fun is let's do scenarios here, talking what people should be thinking about and processing into 2021 from a financial planning perspective. I'll name a few. I have 3 or 4 buckets here of different people and different situations that they're in, even people that I know personally that are in these situations, and just kind of hear your thoughts on both of these. We'll start with you, Don, and we're going to start with the person, and a lot of people unfortunately had this happen in 2020, the person who's lost their job, and maybe they've gotten another job, maybe it doesn't pay as much, maybe it's not in the career that they were hoping, but they've gotten another job, or maybe they right now are still out of work. And just thinking about those people, I have a lot of friends at ESPN who lost their job after 30 plus years. And it was hard to watch. And after people who put in their, 15, 20 years and thought they were going to be there forever, and they got cut loose. So I'm thinking about those people specifically, but others too, so many around the country who lost their jobs. What should they be trying to figure out and focus on as they look into 2021, Don?
Well, finding another job for one,
of course.
But those are such hard things. And I always tell people when they come into my office and they go, where are you at now? You got to find out, where am I at now? And you got to be truthful with yourself. You've got to have reality. Where are we at? Where are our sources, our resources? How can we best use them? But also looking back and saying, how did I get here? What would I have done different? Had I known this was going to happen, what would I have done differently? So that always has to be in your backgrounds going. So that's where we interject principles. You can't have people come in, they go, what do I do now? I go, you're asking me to undo maybe 20, 30 years of bad financial planning. I can't do. I can't, for some people that come in their 70s and they are just a train wreck, you go, well, hope for the second coming of Jesus. That's what I can do. You go, some you just can't fix. But people should, if you've got resources, whether it's in retirement plans, whatever it is, those are the last places you want to draw on them. But you just got to say, don't panic, because that's not going to help at all. People make such irrational decisions when they're thinking short term rather than thinking long term. So they need to lay out a plan saying, okay, what do we do if this goes on? Where are our resources? Now, how do we do this? Lay it out. Don't fight over it. The number one source for divorce in this country is finances, because people argue based on what they saw growing up. If they don't pull it together to what I always tell young couples, look, it doesn't matter what your daddy said. It matters what the daddy in heaven says, because he laid it out in Scripture. If you can both get on the same pages and follow his plan, you're going to have a shot, because he didn't bring you this far to dump you. He will help you, but you got to make right choices based on his decisions, his principles, not panic. And I think that's what I would say. Don't panic.
Reed, thoughts?
Yeah, I think Don hit it on the head as he kind of referenced, figure out where you're at. is probably the starting point. And I think what this year, 2020, last year did for us was really show us where our budget was maybe over. Cause I think, the market doing well, having a job, we can kind of hide, we can make our debt payments, you're making your credit card payments, your car payments, your student loans payments, your house payment, right? All that stuff's good. And then you lose your job and all of a sudden you're faced with, I need to actually take a look at my budget, which most people don't even have. So where's my money going? Most people look at their Quicken report or their bank statement and say, hey, here's my budget. And it's like, no, that's what you've spent. A budget tells your money where to go. You could call it a spending plan if you don't like the term budget. Some people don't like that term. But what last year did was really force us to say, all right, what can I cut out? What are these, what's that $20 a month membership for? It just kind of pointed our attention to that. The other thing I think it revealed to us was our debt, right? So when we have a lot of debt, all of a sudden the job goes away. I still have to make those payments. So the Bible says that the borrower becomes slave to the lender. Well, what does that really mean? You don't feel like a slave until you lose your job. And now you have to make these payments, which then forces you into decisions that you don't want to have to make, but you have to because of where you're at financially. And so, we talk a lot about the 5 uses of money, and it's this idea of that you have your income coming in, and that can only go 5 places. It can go to giving, taxes, you can put it in savings, it can go to pay off debt, or it can go to living expenses. And so most people don't really think about it in those buckets, but, to your scenario here, right? Somebody that lost their job, hopefully they've sat down and said, okay, what can we do without? How do we get this budget as tight as possible? It drew some attention to their debt. So as soon as they do get another job, they need to make sure they're spending less than they make, and then start to attack that debt, which is going to create. So if I'm going in, to this year, after seeing what happened last year, I'm going to be very intentional to try to eliminate debt. Now, maybe not my house necessarily, but credit card debt, those high yield, high interest debts, right? Credit cards, student loans, auto, and try to get to where I'm in a place where if I were to lose my job again, because we're not guaranteed we're out of the woods yet,
sure.
I'm at a place where I can weather that more easily.
Don?
Yeah, I think the thing is that what Reed's saying is really good. And we can be real prescriptive on things, but people sometimes don't, they may not have all those resources to do in time to do that. One thing, so to keep people from, because the biggest thing is what's going to happen is there's going to be panic, there's going to be fear, people are going to get alienated, they're going to fight, is that to bring somebody else in as more of a referee to give counsel, good biblical counsel on it. All of us have to have once a year, I have my own financial planner, which is Reed's dad. And I've tried to fire him several times, but he keeps coming back. But anyways, we have someone to look, because I can get tunnel vision about my own stuff. And really that having that person to come in case you're getting tunnel vision about it, you don't know what to do, is to go ahead and bring some counsel in of someone else that can really help you through it as a couple. And then also it goes back to one thing. The reason why people panic is because they have no emergency funds. And they don't have, and we tell people, look, you need 1 year's living expenses. You don't do any investing until you get 1 year's living expenses, which means living expenses. What does it take us to get by? If we were to lose our job, what would we do? It's not about trying to preserve a lifestyle, because there's certain lifestyle things you may have to give up. You may have to sell your boat in order to pay off that boat loan. You got to be willing, if God owns it all, that he can take whatever he wants whenever he wants it. You got to be willing to give those up to get back in a situation, but then start building, saying, you know what, we're going to build that year, because in case something like this happens again, we don't want to panic. We want to be able to listen to God. We don't want to have to necessarily take the first job that may not suit us. But if you had the emergency funds, you can then say, okay, wait for what he shows you he wants you to do as a job or something. But I think that's the whole issue of and then people are going to find themselves in the situation. I mean, the jobless rate is right now 885,000 people today filed for unemployment. That's a lot of people in this country. And they're facing with this stuff right now.
Yeah. And I was just going to add, you mentioned this at the beginning, that Don and I work in our professional athlete space. So we get the unique privilege of working with these guys who I think a lot of people hold up in this high esteem. They've got it made. They have all these big contracts. But, what we're talking about right now, we were dealing with this all last year as we had minor league players that didn't get to play, which was kind of funny because they actually made more money not playing than they did when they were playing, because they only make about $6,000 a year. So some of them were making about $400 a week. So they made $1,600 a month for 6 months instead of $1,000. But for a lot of our ball players, their income went from, $1 million down to 370, went to 37%. And so we're having this exact same conversation with professional athletes. What do we cut out? How do we cut back? Now, again, a lot of our guys had a good, healthy emergency fund. So they had cash to weather the storm, but they were still having the same discussion around budgeting that the listeners right now would have. So I think it's just important to kind of recognize that nobody was immune from 2020, and these principles apply whether you're making, the hourly minimum wage or you're making millions of dollars a year. It kind of drew our attention back to these principles that we continue to talk about.
Yeah. Don Christensen and Reed Crosson are joining us. They're from Ronald Blue Trust, and you can check out Ronald Blue Trust and all the great work they're doing at ronblue.com. That's the website, ronblue.com. All right, let's go through a couple more of these scenarios here. There's the person who didn't lose their job, but still a little uneasy. Maybe they aren't sure what to do with any excess cash. Should they keep saving? Should they be investing? Real estate seems to be big right now. What do you think with that? Let's start with you, Don. Your thoughts on someone who hasn't lost their job but isn't sure what to do with any excess cash that they might have right now?
Yeah, and it's time to, every year, whether it was 2020 or any time, at the end of the year, it's always time to reevaluate, go to sit down and talk about, hey, what are our goals? Are our goals still the same? Is our plan set up to help us meet our goals? The one thing we always start is with, there's basically, you start with number one. We have a scale of how to invest. Okay. So the number one really is about, hey, is your consumer debt paid off? You're not going to get a better return than not paying 18% on a credit card. So do we have the money to do that? But people should start at least with a 3-month living expense. And I say build it up to a year of emergency funds. Then you go, once that's set, and that's, then you go, the next step is this. Okay, so do we have any major purchases that we need to make? Are we going to buy a car? So, hey, we'd like to buy a car for cash instead of buy debt. How are we going to do that? Are we want to buy a home? So we need 20% down payment for a home. Those would stay in cash. You don't even get to the market until all those things are taken care of. Then if you're willing to invest, then we say 3 to 9 years of living expenses in less risky assets such as bonds, things like that, things that are a debt that you loan money to people and they pay you back at a certain rate of interest. You don't even get to the long-term investing until after 10 years is taken care of. Now, let me pay a caveat to that is that if you are in a 401k, and you're very young, I would take risk on that. I'm talking about assets outside of your retirement plan. But most people want to start at step number 6. They want to, hey, I used to have athletes call me up. They were watching the Beverly Hillbillies or something. They called me up going, hey, Don, man, we got to invest in oil and gas. We saw Jed shooting the ground and up comes bubbling crude. I go, dudes, turn your TV off. They go, we want to be rich. I go, you're already rich. I go, it's time to preserve it. So this stair-step way of looking at it is that wealth is not created by investing in the stock market. Wealth is created by spending less than you earn. So your plan and what you're doing with your excess cash should fulfill what are we doing long term? How do we preserve what we saved? How we adjust our expenses? Because that's the thing you have the most control of is your expenses. And doing it in a strategy like that is what seems to work.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat something he already said and just remind people, again, we talk about athletes because that's the space we're in. And I think it's easier for somebody to say, yeah, but those guys have a lot of money. I'm never going to be rich. Right. And first off, you were born in the U.S. You are rich. We're so blessed to be here in the States. And we have so much more than people in other countries. But we always tell people, hey, do you want to be rich? And of course, everybody says, yes, I want to be rich. And we say, we'll tell you how to do it. It's really simple. You do what God has called you to do and what he's equipped you to do, you spend less than you make and you do it for a long time. I worked with a police officer and a teacher who were married. And when they went to retire, they had no idea their net worth was over $1 million. And it was just because for 45 years, they spent less than they made. They did it for a long time. They put away into retirement, and they were able to retire in this really strong financial position. And I think that it kind of goes back to, where do you start this whole thing? And it's spending less than you make. Well, first off, doing what God's called you to do. Because I think a lot of people, and this is kind of getting onto more of like, what do you do for work? But people kind of chase the dollars. So, hey, I'm going to go be a doctor. I'm going to go, do whatever because that's where the money is, versus, hey, what has God called me to do? And I'm going to pursue that, even if it means less money, because that's going to be where I'm the most fulfilled with what he's gifted me to do. And then I'm just going to make sure I make my budget work, versus, hey, I want this certain lifestyle. Now I'm going to pursue a career that can support the lifestyle that I want. And then work starts to feel like a chore. But you mentioned real estate. You were asking the question initially, like, how do we handle excess? And I think that just like any investment, you need to know where it fits in your overall plan, in your overall portfolio. So people want to jump to, hey, real estate's, it's booming right now, so I'm going to go jump in. Well, have you done those steps that Don was talking about? Have you paid off debt? The consumer debt? Have you built an emergency fund? Have you, saved for major purchases? And then you can start to say, all right, how does real estate fit into my investment portfolio? And I'll say that with a caveat that there's some people where real estate is their career, and that's a different ball game, because that's what they spend all their time focusing on, versus somebody who's a passive investor that's, hey, that seems like a good deal. I mean, I remind people all the time, I got a lot of guys right now that want to do rental properties. And yes, that seems like a great idea. And, you could earn $1,500 or $2,000 a month, but you've got expenses, you've got taxes, you've got insurance, you've got a lot of things that people don't think about, where those returns end up being 6 or 7%, which is still good, but it's just, there's risk there too. And we're 12 years removed from the housing crash in 2008. So I don't think we want to forget that, hey, can be susceptible to, a downturn as well. And so that's just a good reminder. Don't just jump on the bandwagon. You got to kind of make sure the stair steps work. And the last thing I'm going to repeat from Don is just, investments are to preserve wealth. So when you have excess, you want to first lay the foundation so that when the market does go down or something happens, you're not borrowing again, going back into debt. You've got these buckets filled up, but a lot of people want to get rich from their investments, because we see that on the news or on social media, right? We all post, hey, I made this investment, it tripled or quadrupled or whatever. Nobody's posting, hey, I made this investment and it went down, or I lost all my money. So just a good reminder, there's a lot more of those stories out there that we don't hear. So occasionally people do make it rich from their investments, but you should view it as a way to preserve your wealth, not make wealth.
Don, any last thoughts on this scenario specifically?
Yeah, especially real estate, is that liquidity is a key. We tell people that, you've got 4 scenarios for an economy. You've got inflation, deflation, a monetary collapse, and political upheaval. All countries in one of those 4 scenarios. If you're out of debt, highly liquid, and well diversified, you'll beat 3 of them. Political upheaval, if they take all the Christians, lock them up, and take our assets away, like they did Germany did to the Jewish people in during World War II, there's nothing I can do to plan for that. So, right. But I to tell you an example. I had a man who I knew very well, and he came to me, and I hadn't seen him for a while, and he had been a planning client of mine, but he decided that he was far above what we needed, and so he was a believer and everything, but just sometimes people get to thinking as they get wealthy that these principles of Scripture no longer apply to us. But he came to me, he said, Don, I have $1 billion in real estate. And I go, well, I know you do. I go, how much equity in there? He goes, 640 million, something like that. I go, so you're telling me you got 480 million in debt on it. And I go, and you're going to lose every dime of it. Because you don't have the liquidity to carry the debt, which happens a lot of times in real estate. I know a lot of real estate guys, they hate cash because they always want to be fully invested. But that's the whole point of liquidity. We usually don't have real estate as a passive investment, not a business, more than 20% of someone's portfolio, because it's not liquid. You can't just turn around and sell it tomorrow. And people say, they'll say, well, my stock portfolio is going down. I go, so what? You're not selling it. Do you care what your house is worth today, Jason? Because you're not selling your house today. So it doesn't matter until the day I sell it. Well, that's the same. That's how real estate works. So the issue is, do I have liquidity enough to carry? Real estate's a very forgiving asset, but can you afford to own it during the bad times? Because there will be bad times for every asset class.
We're thankful to have Don Christensen and Reed Crosson here from Ronald Blue Trust to answer some of, I guess, my questions. I didn't reach out to our listeners, but some of the topics that I think that a lot of people would relate to and have questions about, especially in terms of financial planning. One of the buckets of people, I guess the scenario that I'd like to go to is the younger person, the person who's 22, 23, 24, out of school, looking for a job. They got loans probably to pay back. They're trying to figure out, what they want to do. Maybe they have a dream job or a dream career, and they're trying to pursue that, but they're not making enough money to really pursue that because it doesn't pay a lot when you first start, and they got to pay off loans. There's so many questions that a lot of young people have just getting started in life. So Reed, let me start with you on this one, whether it's car, home, student loans. What would you say to that person that comes to you and says, listen, I really don't know where to go or what to do here, and I'm just getting started?
Yeah, it's a good question. I remember going back to my alma mater and speaking to the seniors. They had us come in and just do a session on money and finances and kind of trying to equip them as they were leaving college. And I thought it was a great idea. But one of the questions I asked, and actually I'm gonna ask you this question and see how you do. Somebody coming out of college, how much money do you think they should be shooting to save? Like, what is a dollar amount that they need to try to save up just to kind of get started?
Oh, man. So I'm thinking about me at 23, and I was making, and this is in 1996, 97, and I was still in college, actually. Then I graduated, and I was making like $15,000. That was my actual salary for my first job in radio coming out of college. And I had about 20 grand in loans to pay off. I didn't have a ton amount of loans back then, but I still had way more than I could afford to pay back. And I wasn't even thinking about saving because I'm like, I just got to pay back these loans that are a couple $100 or whatever it was a month. My guess would be, Reed, maybe, I don't know, a couple $100 a month.
Yeah.
Am I way off on that?
You are. Well, but I'll say you're coming from a place of, hey, that's probably all you could save. Right. Yeah. And I should have said too, a lot of people get out of college and they get married. Right. So you might have two incomes. But we usually tell people like a goal that you want to have in savings is 50 to 75,000. Okay. That should be the goal. So, a couple $100 a month. Yeah. That's, $2,500 a year. Okay. So that's going to take a while to get to that goal, but people are always, I get people usually say 5 to 10,000. That's how much they think they need to save coming out of college. And when you say 50 to 75, it's always shocking. But then when you start breaking it down, it's an emergency fund, like we talked about. It's cash to be ready to buy, 20% down on your first home. And we always recommend if you can do 20% down, you can save on mortgage insurance and some things like that. And you can have a better opportunity versus somebody can only put down 5%. Sure. Purchasing your next car so you can pay cash. You don't have to take out a loan for your next car. And so pretty quickly that 50 grand, 75 grand, you can see where that goes. And I think what it does, it almost shocks people, but it helps them realize, oh, wow, like I really need to be intentional about saving. And it's what we tell young married couples. And I know Don's grandson is getting married, so he's going to be a great grandfather soon, which is hilarious. But he'll talk about that in a minute. Nice. And I know, I'm sorry. I need to respect my boss. But just, thinking through as you get married, living off one income and saving the other income. Like that's the best way to get to that 50 to 75,000 number is live off one. And then it gives you options down the road where if one spouse, loses their job or one wants to stay home with kids or whatever, you have flexibility to be able to do that. But I think when I'm talking to these kids coming out, it's, paying down debt's important. So that's part of the process, but you can be paying down debt and saving at the same time. You shouldn't just shove it all to, pay off debt and not have an emergency fund. So you want to kind of do both simultaneously. But I think it's just helping them understand like saving is so, so important. Yeah.
Don, I want to ask you, because I think we think about young people in this scenario. What is the biggest mistake? If you want, I don't want to call it mistake because we're 23. We're going to make mistakes when we're this young or whatever, 24, 25 years old. But what's the common misnomer and issue that you see? Is it the savings side of things that people, because you said earlier, you guys talked about this, you said it like 5 or 6 times, don't spend more than you make. And I think even at young ages, people tend to do that. They want the nice car. They want the nice place to live. They want it all before they really can get to that point to be able to afford it. What's the biggest thing you see?
They don't have a plan. And I'm just a basic plan.
Yeah.
So I'm helping as Reed was alluding to my age. Reed has never seen the classic movie Tombstone.
Oh, come on, Reed.
It's in the words of Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday, not me, I'm in my prime. So I feel like I'm in my prime right now. Anyways, but my grandson and my future granddaughter, and I love them both, but they are part of their marriage counseling, and I'm performing the service, but Brian Hommel from UPI is doing their counseling. But one of the things I'm helping them with is that looking at how their money spent. So doing a 12-month cash flow, which we do for everyone. It's the place to start. Where does the money go? And until someone can look, my other grandson just got a job as a fireman, making really good money, and he's still single. But to see, after you pay taxes, after you pay union dues as a fireman, after you pay all these things, and put some money in a 401k because they're matching it, what's left over? And that's where most people who've never done this don't have reality of where do they spend their money, especially if they've lived at home all through college and really have, really lived off their parents. All of a sudden they're cast out here. They go, you've got to get reality in check. Where does this go? How much is really net of that paycheck? And when you look at 12 months, you can see if you're going to be short for the year. If you're going to be short, you're either going to have to draw on savings. If there's no savings, there's only one other way to finance living expenses, and that's consumer debt. And is that a good choice? And that's why people are burdened with debt, because they never look at where the money goes. I always tell young couples, here's what you do. You got a computer. First thing I want to do is either get a Quicken program. If you got a Mac, subscribe to Banktivity or one of them or if you got on your phone to Mint, find out where your money's going first. So that gives you the big picture. Then you need to sit down and have written financial goals. Where do we want to end up? Have a goal for the year. How much do we want to have in savings? Unless you're doing something like that, you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. And that's what the problem for a lot of people.
Reed, do you see that? I mean, is it the most common thing that you see when you talk to people is that some people might say, listen, I'm living paycheck to paycheck, so I can't have a plan here. I just want to make sure I pay my bills and have enough food to eat and go on to the next thing. But do you see that as the most common misnomer, if you will, or not misnomer, but mistake, I guess, is that there's just no plan, that they're just making money and maybe put a little bit in savings and there's no real clear picture here?
Yeah. And you and I talked about it a little bit before. It's just, if our money doesn't have a purpose assigned to it, it will find a purpose. And I think that's, again, I know we don't like the term budget, but call it a spending plan. Hey, and Don hit it on the head. You need to have goals, because if some guys come and they say, hey, I want to be able to buy a house, I want to be able to buy a car. And like a lot of times when you have a goal, something you're shooting for, it's motivation to get your arms around your finances and assign, hey, all right, this much money needs to go into saving every month so that I can buy this car I want, or I can buy this house I want. And when you don't have those goals, then you usually don't have a plan. So the money comes in, it's sitting in your account. Well, I can afford this, so I buy it. And then what happens is you fast forward 3 years. Now you're getting married. You want to buy a house, and you're limited, right? Because you just haven't done that. And it's never going to become easier to save than when you're first kind of out on your own. Like he was mentioning his grandson that's a single fireman. It's like, this is the chance for him to save as much as possible, because you get married and then you have kids and then you have, school. Just things add up. I mean, you're shaking your head because right? Mm-hmm. You have a child, and it's like, you see that, and then it's, they start driving and they get a car and all that stuff. So, and I will say one thing about the car, because this is, something that is always kind of, I go back and forth on, but as much as you want to pay cash for a car, and there's good options out there. I love used cars. That's the way to go. That's my little plug. Buying new is just really tough because you drive it off the lot and it depreciates. Unless you're going to drive that thing 10 to 12 years, I would buy, even if it's 1 or 2 years old, that makes a lot of sense. But a lot of car loans are 5 years. So what we tell people is, okay, if you need to take out a loan, if you can't afford to pay cash for this car, pay it off in 5 years. And then the next 5 years, while you're still driving the same car, continue to make those same payments into a savings account that's earmarked for your car that you're not going to touch. I actually have one myself that's at a credit union that's not even associated with my bank. So I kind of forget that it's even there sometimes. And then I pull up my Mint account and I'm able to see it on there. I'm like, oh, that's great. I forgot I've been saving for this car so that we're ready when the time comes to buy our next car. We're not going to have to take out a loan.
That's good. Don, I know you want to jump in here. I have a question, and this might be an answer or a piggyback off that. Are leasing cars the devil? Like, is that something that you just need to run away from in terms of car leases? A lot of people, it's popular, it's out there, low car payments. Just real quick, your thoughts. I go back to Reed real quick, Don, and then you can pick it up. Reed, leasing, not a good idea? Good idea?
Yeah, personally, we're not big fans of it because you're making payments, and then at the end of 3 years, you have nothing to show for it. Versus again, I actually ran this scenario for a prospect, kind of saying, they were changing cars every couple of years, and that's usually what we get. People that are like, "Hey, I want to change my car out. I don't want to be stuck with the same car, so I'm going to lease." Well, it turned out, they're paying $120,000, every 4 years, and you're going, you could have some really nice cars that, yeah, you might pay $120,000 for, but they're still worth $80,000 after 3 years versus just being worth, they're paying $40,000 a year for leases. And obviously that's an extreme example, but I think it's just a going to realize like, hey, and then you end up with, you have mileage limits, like maybe the kids can't even ride in the car. So I think, purchasing is the way to go. And, but that's my opinion. I'd be curious if Don has any other thoughts on that.
Sure. Don.
Yeah, you go back to, we always quote as people who use the Bible as the principles, pull their principles out. We quote Proverbs 22:7, the borrower is slave to the lender, but that's not the whole verse. That's only half of it. Solomon says, he goes, the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is a lender's slave. I finally figured out years ago what that first half had to do with the second half. He was basically saying the rich loan to the poor and put them in bondage. So if it's a good deal for the rich to loan to the poor, it's got to be a good deal for the poor to pay off the rich. It's got to work the exact same way. So when you look at a lease, you go, they're not doing this for their health. This is not some free lunch. Right. So you got to say, what's going on? You are paying an interest rate in that lease. You can never come out of a lease if you drive more than 15,000 miles a year. It's just impossible. And you might be able, but they're doing it for a reason. They understand that. Well, that's what Solomon's saying. People say, well, why would you pay your house off? I go, simple. Because why would the people loan me the money for the house in the first place if it wasn't a good deal? Hey, look, give me an investment that pays you 3.5% and has no market risk. Paying your debt off.
Yeah.
I go, that's where you have to start thinking, quit thinking like the world and think like as God thinks. He gave us his these proverbs and all these ways he said, hey, I own it all. I give you the power to make wealth. And here's the manual to handle it, because all that wealth is to finance your ministry, to your family, to the gospel and everything else. He goes, that's what it's there for. It's a resource that I've given you. And I'm not going to add sorrow to it. I'll give you joy of how to handle it, because, hey, you need to save some, you need to spend some, you need to invest some. And especially you need to give some to acknowledge that the God who gave it to you in the first place exists. So,
well, you're transitioning to the last topic that we're going to have time for here, Don, in the perfect scenario. It's almost like we had planned that. Don Christensen and Reed Crosson are joining us from Ronald Blue Trust. Again, the website's ronblue.com, and you can learn more and reach out to them, and they'll certainly be willing to help you and listen and kind of have a consultation with you. They'd love to hear from you. We are told to be generous. And so where does generosity fit into all this? We really haven't talked about giving, but we know that God commands us to give back a portion of all that he has blessed us with. And we talk about that in church a lot, but I think as a lifestyle, it's super important for us as believers to be generous with all that God has blessed us with. So let's start there. I'll go to Don first and then Reed. Don, just some thoughts as we wind down here on generosity and where it fits into all of this.
Well, I think that it came to over the years of people trying to do giving as a percentage, which is very Old Testament. And by the way, it does appear one time in Scripture in the New Testament. It seems to be a beginning point with it, but Jesus laid it out in Matthew 6:19. He goes, why would you store treasure here on earth where moth and rust? I mean, moths eat the clothes you're not wearing. They don't eat the clothes you're wearing. Rust doesn't eat what you're using. Rust is he says, why would you store it here? He goes, move it to heaven. He goes, hey, that's where you believe you're going to live eternally. So he's saying, hey, it's not about how much can I get away with? It's how much can I move there? If I believe I'm going to spend eternity in heaven, then generosity should come much easier for a believer. In Luke 6:38, he says, give, and it will be given unto you. What will be given unto you? He goes, pressed down, shaken together, they will pour into your lap. Because when you say give and it seems to be what costs you something, what you need. David said, I will never give God that which costs me nothing. So he says, you give, and what is it? It can be a bonus. It can be a salary raise. It can be many things. He goes, here's the deal. Here's the quality of what God will give you. And this is not name it, claim it, because that's heresy.
Right.
But what it says, the quality of whether it's a ministry, whether it's souls for the kingdom, he goes, pressed down, shaken together, they will pour into your lap. Because what happened was when they used to gather wheat in the marketplace, they would fold their robes up, put the wheat in, they would shake it so they get rid of the airspace and they could put more in it. So he says the quality is there. Then he said, here's the deal. By your standard of measure, it will be measured unto you. So what Jesus basically saying is, people come to me and say, Don, should we give before tax or net of tax if we got a percentage? I go, well, that verse says you want a before tax blessing or an after tax blessing. You set the standard. If you're cheap with God, he's going to be cheap with trusting you with more money because he's given you more because he trusts you that you can handle it and you can do more for the kingdom of God. So I just say that's my thing on generosity is don't be a duty giver. The Pharisees were duty givers. They were not going to give one penny more than that tithe. But a grace giver who's under God's grace says, it's not how much can I get away with, it's how much can I move there? How much more can I do? So that's my thing on generosity.
Grace giver. I love that concept that Don just described. So kind of close us out with some other thoughts on just the importance of being generous, because you work with a lot of athletes and that's a big thing with them too, because some, like you said, are on that small scale as minor league players, but it's still required to be generous there too, just like it is if you're making $20 million a year, right?
Yeah, we hear a lot of people, not just in the athlete space, say, well, once I make more, then I'll start to give. And it's right. That reality of be faithful and start the habit when you're young. So whether it's a minimum wage job, hey, and it doesn't have to be 10%. And like Don said, that's just a percentage. The Bible says give with a cheerful heart and give as you've been prospered to give. So give in accordance with your income, but he doesn't need our money, right? God, we established that at the beginning of this podcast that God owns it all. The cattle on 1,000 hills are his. There's the story where he says, hey, go open up the mouth of that fish and there's coins in there, right? And so you go, he can make money appear. So he doesn't need our money, but he invites us in to participate on what and what he's doing here on earth so we can experience joy. And I think it's the reality, and we've all heard it said, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, right? And it doesn't say money, it says the love of money. Mm-hmm. And we talk about that a lot where it's okay to enjoy what we have, but not when we enjoy God himself. And ultimately, giving acknowledges that ownership, that it's God's money to begin with. And you look back in Deuteronomy and it says that it is I, the Lord, that gives the ability to make wealth. So, when I talk to athletes all the time, it's like, how come I'm not, 6'7", can run a 4.4? Like that isn't how God gifted me. But when you look at these athletes, you go, God blessed you with this ability for a reason. He could have chosen not to. I mean, yes, don't get me wrong. These guys work really hard, just like our listeners work hard at their craft. But God also allowed them to be in a profession that actually makes quite a bit of money for playing a sport. And so then you ask the question, man, why did God allow this to happen? And it allows me to acknowledge ownership of what he's given to me, and especially giving it away. I mean, that's what, when you hold it tight, it starts to be hard to really be able to just honor him with what we have. And so he invites us in to be generous and to give and to say, hey, participate in what I'm doing here. Even if it's 2%, start somewhere and watch God work. And like Don said, it's not a name it, claim it. It's not a prosperity deal where it's like, hey, if I do this, I'm going to get X, Y, and Z, because yes, you will be blessed, but it might look different, or it might be in heaven. We don't know that this side of heaven we're going to see, financial return. I mean, we hear those stories sometimes, and it's pretty exciting because God can do that. But we give because He asked us to, and we want to out of a joyful heart.
Yeah, Don, as I wind down, have you ever heard somebody come to you and say, "I regret being generous," in all the time that you've done this?
No, behavior follows belief.
Yeah.
Behavior follows belief. Billy Graham once said, he goes, your checkbook is a theological document that tells what and who you worship. And it's just, you go, there's a big deal there. I go, I can tell you where you stand with the Lord. Let me see your checkbook. Because it is the one thing that's done in private with the Lord. You will never give money to a God you don't believe in. It's for the Old Testament, it was a tax. But I go, there's not one thing, unless you really believe God exists and He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him, your checkbook should follow. I always tell people when they get baptized, make sure your wallet's in your back pocket so he gets baptized too.
So true. They are Don Christensen and Reed Crosson from Ronald Blue Trust. Reed, I know your dad actually wrote a really cool book called Your Money Made Simple, The Key to Financial Freedom. Can you give a quick plug on that? Why people should, maybe if they're looking for a place to start with all this, and this is just a little overwhelming listening to all this, why that book is such a good resource?
Yeah, he's written a number of books. It's been cool to kind of see. We always joke with him. They're not bestsellers. None of them have been, but that's not why he writes them. He really feels led to just put stuff on paper that will help people. And we give the books away a lot of times. I don't know what they don't cost very much. They're online. I saw them at Publix, but the kind of the background of this book was that, growing up, I just remember sitting in the other room, hearing my parents counsel couples, couple after couple, church, some wealthy, some not wealthy. Just how do I get out of debt? A lot of the questions we've kind of talked about today. And so when he went to write this book, it was like, how do I put basically, walking through a plan, into a book. And so instead of having a flip chart, he was going to call it the flip chart, but nobody knows what a flip chart is. He still has a flip chart and he always pulls it out and he draws, the 5 uses of money on there and goes through it. But what's cool about this book is anybody can pick it up and read it, and you just go through chapter by chapter. It walks you through exactly, if you don't know where to find a certain number, because it's trying to, help you get your effective tax rate, it will show you a picture of your, this is the form you need to get. And it basically, by the end of it, you'll have a financial plan, so that's kind of been the theme running through our conversation today is you need to have some sort of a plan to point you in the right direction to make sure you're spending less than you make. And this book is a great tool to do that. And if you have no financial background, no number background, it is about as easy as it gets to walk through and just do the steps. So I would encourage people that are saying, hey, I'd like to work through building out a financial plan. It's a short, easy, it's not even a read. It's really a workbook.
Yeah, it's a great book, and I've gone through it, and I'm holding it in my hand right now. Your Money Made Simple. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for those listening. Little Amazon link right there, and then a link to ronblue.com as well, and you can click all the links and find everything you need to do to get to Ronald Blue Trust. And you can search Don Christensen and Reed Crosson too, and I'm sure find you guys as well. Don, Reed, thank you so much for doing this. This has been a treat, an awesome time talking, and we'll have to do it again because there's probably 40% of the stuff that we wrote down to talk about we didn't even get to. So I'm thinking in a couple more months, maybe mid-year or so, we need to do another one of these and have some conversations. So Don, thank you. Reed, thank you. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks, Jason.
Absolutely.
And many thanks to Don Christensen, Reed Crosson, both from Ronald Blue Trust. Again, their website, ronblue.com, is a great place to go, ronblue.com. If you have questions, if you want to reach them at Ronald Blue Trust, you can go to that website, ronblue.com. And I will put in the show notes the name again of that book. It's called Your Money Made Simple, The Key to Financial Freedom. It's written by Russ Crosson, who is Reed's dad. And I'll put a link in the show notes. It's a great book to get. It's not that expensive, really. It's affordable, but it could save you so much hassle as you're starting to plan and figure out, where am I going with all that I have and what am I going to do? this book, and certainly Don and Reed have answered a lot of questions for us here today on the show. So we hope this encouraged you. I hope you took a lot of notes. I know I did. And just going forward, let's see what 2021 brings us. And I'm grateful for people like Don and Reed who want to invest in our lives to do the right thing, but really to give it all to God and understand that it's all His. And this is a really important topic. I know it's not the typical sports and faith conversation that you might hear, but I just thought, hey, we're all going through something, especially regarding our finances. Why don't we ask some questions to Don and Reed? So we appreciate them for joining us here today. Again, go to ronblue.com to learn more about Ronald Blue Trust, ronblue.com. We appreciate you joining us here today on the show. Make sure you hit up our website, sportsspectrum.com, and then make sure you rate and review and subscribe, all the things that you can do for this podcast. It helps us get the word out. Whatever podcast app you're listening to this show on, make sure you click that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. And we'll see you tomorrow with a brand new episode here on Sports Spectrum. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.